I'm Indra, and I'd like to welcome you to the Messy Middle Matters, where my friends and I explore all the twists, turns, and challenges that arise in the messy middle of work. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Messy Middle Matters. Today, we've talked a lot over the past episodes about like change and promotions and how to reinvent yourself and how to constantly stay relevant. But the one thing that we really haven't talked about, we touched on a little bit in the episode with Mickey, and we touched on it in a little bit in an episode not too long ago with our guest today, is grief. Grief can show up in the most interesting, unexpected ways. And sometimes it even shows up when you get the thing that you wanted. So before we go any further, let me welcome Stephanie back. Stephanie, thank you so much for joining me for a second.
Yes, thank you for having me again. I mean, we could have talked for hours last time.
Hours.
I'm glad you're getting me back on.
Well, for people who didn't hear you the last time, maybe they're listening to things in reverse order, tell everybody a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So I'm based in New York City, and I have my own coaching and consulting business working with people in various industries in a variety of different ways. So to be more specific, working with people navigating change and transition. My background is in stress management and psychology and really looking at it from a holistic perspective. So the first part of my career was actually a dancer, an artist, performing artist. And while I still play around in that world as well, how I bring that into my work is really getting people back into their bodies, which I think will probably come up a few times in our conversation today. And then working with organizations in creating leadership development programs and team and group coaching, as well as like executive coaching, so that we're creating spaces that people are being supported to do the work that they're being asked to do in a sustainable way. So it also connects to like burnout and workplace culture and a lot about emotional intelligence and relational intelligence and all of the what we call the soft skills, which are sometimes actually the harder to be able to learn and develop because we didn't actually get a lot of training in that in school or things like that. We learn like how to do the hard skills or the technical things, and yet
all of that in air
with
quotes.
humans is important and can create a lot of stress and overwhelm that can be detrimental over time. So those are kind of the spaces in the world in which I play.
Yeah. And you joined. So it was episode 46 for anyone wondering. And we were talking about the goose stage. Just because I imagine we're going to reference it just a little bit. Can you give like the quick top line on what the goose stage is and a little bit of that so that people can, maybe it's a teaser for the former episode too, a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. So I started using the phrase the goose stage a couple of years ago because, as I mentioned, I work with a lot of like change and transition. And really, we're all going through change and transition all the time. That's what growing means.
That's what living means. Goodness gracious.
Exactly. And what I started realizing and like kind of tapping into, and we talked about this on the other episode, is, I really like butterflies. I always have. And just that metaphor that a lot of people use is like, if you remember change, the caterpillar had to change to turn into the butterfly. And I just kind of like, I was like, yes, that's really like hopeful. And yet what we don't talk a lot about is that, and what's so great about your podcast is that messy middle, right? And what happens from the caterpillar to the butterfly. And that is the goo stage, as I call it, in the chrysalis, right? Where the caterpillar actually has to like fully like dissolve its form. It's in goo, right? Before and over a period of time, then starts to build its wings so that it can emerge as a butterfly. And for me personally, as somebody who left my full-time career that was, on a wonderful trajectory and all of that, but to also expand what my potential and follow what was calling me, which was to build my own business. It was a side hustle at first. The last 4 or 5 years, I have started to realize like, oh, I kept saying to friends, like, I just feel like a puddle. I don't know quite what I am yet, like all of that. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm in the goo stage. And so, and I've written a lot about this in terms of like, your whole life doesn't need to be in a goo stage, but there might be aspects of things that are a little gooier than others and all of that. So that's what we mean by the goo stage.
Yeah, and how this second episode showed up is when we were talking about that goose stage. Just when you're in the goose stage, you have to let go of your identity as caterpillar. And you might have loved your shape. You might have loved the way that you can climb up trees. You might have loved how you can like descend from a silk, depending on what kind of caterpillar you are. I don't know enough about caterpillars and butterflies to get this scientifically perfectly right, but there are so many things that you were so proud of that are no longer that no longer suit you, no longer fit, no longer are in your capacity to be able to do. Like if I'm thinking about like people leadership, when you step into a people management role, you were peers with a whole bunch of people, and now you're at a different level and you need to let go of that relationship that you once had because they can't, and they shouldn't actually see you the same way that they did before because you have a different role, you have different responsibility, you have different access. And it's just that letting go of that previous identity is like it shows up over and over again in life.
That's a wonderful example, because I feel like that's so relatable to people in the sense there's a few things, many things that you probably have to let go in that transition. One being the way you relate to people, right? And that can be very uncomfortable, right? It becomes, um, you also are now in a position that's new to you. So you're learning new things and there's a lot that comes up with that. Typically, and this is not maybe for everybody, but what you were doing as maybe an individual contributor, you're going to end up doing less when you move into a people manager role. And so you're actually letting go of the thing that you were really good at that got you to where you are in order to continue to expand into wherever you think you might be going. And so there's a lot of like messiness there. I don't know why this came up right now and so I'm just going to share it. But the other image that came up to me is the messiness or the goo or like being in the mud. I kind of feel like the messiness
Mm.
is muddy. I always remind clients that the lotus flower actually grows from mud. Like it has to be in the muddy waters to be able to grow. And so being able to, how do I say this? Being able to be okay in that uncomfortable, messy middle is what's going to help you become the butterfly or the lotus flower, whatever visual really resonates with you.
I love that you brought the lotus flower in because it is one of those it's a metaphor and it's an imagery that is really well known around the globe, more so in Asia, but it is so beautiful and so evocative, and so many of my teachers talk about it. Like it has to go, the seed goes into the mud. It goes into the mud at the bottom and it doesn't know what's going on. But it's just reaching. It's reaching and it's just like hoping to like it's trusting the process of like, no, hold on, like gotta trust that process and keep
Yeah.
reaching for that sun.
Yeah. And you know what came to mind as you were saying that is in order to trust, you also have to surrender and let go. So going back to like the caterpillar has to, like, the caterpillar doesn't know that it's going to become a butterfly, doesn't know what it looks like, all of that. It's just trusting, right? It's surrendering and legitimately letting go of its form. Um, and in that, like, if we want to bring in the grief part about that, even something I learned. So, speaking from my journey, leaving the full-time position that I had for many years, I was choosing to leave there. There was no like, hey, we want you to go. I brought it up and was like, I am planning to m- leave this. Well, I ended up having them as a client afterwards, doing some of the work that I was doing, but I was like, I'm going to leave here full time. I'm expanding my business, all of that. And what I wasn't prepared for was within that first year, I was like, why do I feel really sad about certain things? I knew that it was going to be a challenge, building a business as an entrepreneur. I think most people know that. I felt like I was prepared as much as I could and knew enough to be excited and not too much to be over like whelmed that this could never work. What I did not anticipate was the community that I was leaving, that
Mm,
was built in, and while I think I was ready to leave that specific community, I didn't realize how much community was really important to me. Um I also was shifting a lot of what I was doing on a daily basis. So in that previous job, I was in education. I was building a dance program and a coaching program at the school. I was connecting to my creative side in a very different way than I do now. And so there was an identity shift. I mentioned, I said in my previous career, I still consider myself a performing artist and an artist, but I wasn't doing that on a daily basis the way I was before. And there was that was a huge loss for me. And it wasn't until I was in therapy, which I do regularly, that my therapist was like, "Well, you're grieving." And I was like, "Well, but nothing died. Like, no one died, like all of that." Cause in my brain, that's what we talk about grieving is when someone dies or passes away or you lose. I mean, I was also always told like, a relationship that dies, like that's a grieving thing. But I hadn't thought about it in this way, especially since I chose to do this. And she was like, just because you chose to do something doesn't mean there's still not emotions that are connected to that loss. And that's when I was like, oh, actually, like a weight kind of came off of me. Like there's not something wrong with me. I didn't do something wrong. I didn't make a mistake, right? Things that were my inner gremlin, my inner critic was telling me, well, you should have done that. See, look at this, blah, blah, blah. And going, actually, no, this is part of the process. And how can I continue to hold myself in that so that I'm
yeah.
not getting stuck in it so I can continue to move forward and that both things can be true. I could be really ready to leave and expand and not knowing what's going to like come of this but excited to explore that and feel a sense of loss for the community that I was leaving and the work that I was doing even though I was very much ready to leave doing that work in that sort of way on a daily basis.
I love that story because it highlights the fact we've been conditioned that to correlate grief with like obvious visible loss, right? It's the loss of a relationship, the loss of a loved one. It's really evident and like in your face and like it's a very clear thing. But what you're talking about is the grief that can happen in these really unexpected ways and what you're also talking I love the way that you were talking about how naming it, how the fact that your therapist helped you name that as grief shifted the whole thing. And it's we've talked about this a little bit earlier. So over the past couple of weeks, I've been reflecting on the word grief, and it's showing up everywhere. It's like, oh, it's the grief that I have for the fact that that was a hard time. It's the grief that I have for the fact that I can't stay for the full happy hour, using that metaphor again of like, you're now a people manager. Your job is to pay for happy hour. It is not to hang out and talk about things anymore, right? It's the grief over these tiny little things, but these seemingly tiny things are so meaningful. Like you were talking about community.
Yeah. Yes. Something that came to mind as you were talking is I see with a lot of my clients the grief of, well, they wouldn't have labeled it grief at first, and then I will
Sure.
ask a question, and they're like, "I think that's what it is." It think like the where they thought they would be at this point, right? So wherever
Ooh,
you are on your journey in life, we all probably have some sort of conscious or unconscious like idea of where we think we should be,
yeah.
myself included. And I'm like vividly remembering a client right now where a lot of what was happening is they were getting stuck in like, well, I mean, I feel like I should be here and I should be here, blah, blah, blah. And like, I just feel really heavy or, things aren't bad, but like, I still just don't feel like motivated. And I just feel really heavy. And I was like, it sounds like you're grieving what you thought was going to be. And I just saw them shift completely. And they were like, that's it. That is
Yeah.
it. Like, I had this vision in my head of what this was going to look like and where I was going to be, whether that's personally, professionally, romantically, like whatever that
Yeah.
is. And this isn't quite that, or I haven't gotten there yet, or any of that. And that's frustrating and that's sad and it's overwhelming. And that's grief, right? The same way as when we do lose someone, whether it's, through them passing or loss of a relationship, there are those questions of like, why did this happen? Like, why is this happening to me? Why is this happening to us? What could we have done differently? Like all of that. And that's normal. That is being a human.
Yeah, and I think that the interesting thing is that the grief in these examples, the grief doesn't show up by itself. Like, the grief might be showing up in, like, let's say, using the example of going and going independent, not working for a company anymore, right? There is the excitement over doing something new. There is the fear of not getting it right, of all the, like, let's say, legal filings and all the other things that you have to do. And then there's the grief. And when you have multiple emotions happening at the same time, differentiating them can be hard, and finding space to honor that. Let's say in this case we're talking about grief, finding the space to honor that, and it could be brief, it could be long, depends on the person. This is not a therapy session for everyone, right? We're our job here today is to really talk about it and just surface it so people can explore. But how do you deal with that? How do you acknowledge that grief and still stay excited about the thing, or still keep the hope that this goose stage is going to turn into something as beautiful as a butterfly? Like, finding that balance can be really hard.
Yes. Yeah. You said that really wonderfully. And as you were talking, I was thinking to myself around this time frame of being in February is the time frame that I would be directing and choreographing a show at my previous job. And so grief, the other thing about it, and depending on how many, like what listeners have read or listened to about grief isn't linear either, right? So these emotions can come up whenever, like we might not even realize they're coming up, right? Or all of a sudden we get this like wave. And I always say emotions are energy in motion. So like allowing the emotions to actually flow. So there could be this wave of things. And around this time every year since I've left that job, I do get a little bit of like something in my heart center going, like I'd be going into Tech Week, soon, and costumes would be coming together, and my vision for whatever show we're doing is starting to come together, or is I'm nervous it won't come together, whatever it is. And there is a part of me that each year goes, that like I want to feel that. I allow myself to feel it. And you said the actually allowing yourself to feel it and name it then allows it to move, right? And I'm not bypassing, and this is like the practice that I'm also trying to continue to get better at, is going, it's okay that I feel that. How can I feel gratitude for it? And not go like, okay, but what I'm doing is so much better now. Cause like, I don't know if what I'm doing is actually that much better now, right? Like I still
It's
don't know
different, right?
different. And going, I can still have a lot of gratitude. I can have a lot of fond love for that
Yeah.
and go, and I'm really proud of myself for the things I'm doing now. And if I ever did want to like go back to something like that, I could always do that if I wanted to and find a way to bring parts of that back, which I also think grief can be a really good teacher, right? Like if we actually pause and go, what is it that I'm really grieving? Like, what is it that I'm grieving? So going back to the community thing, at one point I was like, yeah, wow, why am I feeling this? Like, what am I actually feeling? What am I actually feeling like I lost? And the two big things for me, as I mentioned before, was community. And so then gave me data to go, okay, so how can I be more intentional now with building community in my life? Because here's the other thing. I didn't really build that community where I was teaching. It happened by default because that's where I was every day for many, many, many hours. Not to say that that's not legit. It is. But now I get to be intentional. Who do I want to build community with? and that can also be scary, right? Like I joined a run club and let me tell you, I stalked the run club's Instagram for 3 or 4 months before I got the courage and the guts to actually go to a run. And yet now 2.5 years later, a lot of those people are big parts of my life, right? So it does take a lot of bravery too. We don't, the caterpillar has to be brave. And I mean, I don't know if they actually are feeling bravery. I don't know if that's a thing for caterpillars, but I imagine that like there has to be this bravery and courage to go, I'm going to do this thing just the same way as all of us, right? I'm going to try this thing. I'm going to do it. I have no guarantee of what it's going to look like or any of that, but I'm at least going to try.
Yeah.
So that was data for me. And the other one was this identity around, well, this could get into a whole nother conversation around how much does the thing that we do become who we think we are? And so being that I was a choreographer, a dancer, arts education, a director, a creator, all of that, I had to do a lot of work for myself around just because I'm not doing that every day doesn't mean I'm not one of those things anymore. It might look different. I'm doing it in a different costume,
Yeah.
right? As I use as my language all the time for things, but that can be really, really hard. At least for me, it was. I've seen it with other people too, is like, but I'm not doing that thing. So clearly I'm not that anymore. And that's not true. And so being able to have empathy for ourselves, like that's a lot. Grief requires us to have a lot of empathy for ourselves, compassion for ourselves, patience, and to slow down.
Yeah. So you spoke about something that was, I think, is important to highlight, the concept of bypassing, right? And I want to also bring that concept into grief when things are happening with an organization as a whole, right? Whether it's reorganizations, restructuring. So bypassing, I've never been great at defining it, so I'll do my best. But bypassing basically is pretending like the thing is not going on, and really, and just and like hoping that the feeling goes away. It's not putting the feeling to the side and knowing you're going to deal with the feeling later because you're dealing with a crisis right now. Those are two very different things. Bypassing is really pretending that it's going to go away because you ignored it. And a lot of in the years 2025, 2026, we have no idea what's really going to happen in the workplace. But if 2025 is any evidence of it, there will be ongoing restructurings of organizations. We will be losing colleagues to different organizations. We might be the ones who leave or asked to leave because of budget cuts or whatever it might be. Navigating grief in a corporate environment where many companies, I won't say most, many companies have this concept of like, oh, put your feelings at the door, as if we're not human beings that are just literally incapable of doing that. We can pretend like we do, but we don't. And helping how let's talk about navigating grief in those types of environments where everyone is navigating it together, and it may not be acknowledging grief using language like that may not be encouraged.
You bring up a really great point. When there are any restructuring, right?
Yeah.
Usually that means some people are either getting let go of the company or being put on a different team.
Or even new people coming, right? Like there's a whole influx of new people. That's a
Yes.
restructuring too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
people coming in, which then changes roles and
Yeah.
responsibilities. So any sort of change like that is going to bring up some sort of grief for the people involved. And what I wish companies did a little more was pay attention to the fact that, just like you said, when a team changes in any sort of way, but especially when there's layoffs and all of that, the people that are remaining, there's a lot going on with that. A colleague just left that maybe was your bestie at work, maybe not even your bestie, but now they're not there. There might be feelings of like, thank God I didn't get cut, but oh my gosh, like I feel so bad that like everyone else
Survivor's
did. Why
guilt.
did I not get cut,
Yes.
right? The
Yes.
idea that we then is just expected to go along like everything's fine and or like, yes, so this is where we're at. And it's like, okay, so what are we doing now? And it's like, we don't know, just hang tight, keep doing what you're doing. Like we'll figure it out. Like that type of, I don't even know what to, I don't think of it as really good, effective leadership.
It's not
That,
skillful. It's not useful. No,
right. It
no.
is actually, I mean, there's a little bit of dehumanizing dehumanizing. I can't even say that word right now.
It is
And
dehumanizing. Yes.
because we, that is a loss. And so we are processing that, and to actually connect it to the stress part of it. When you are not acknowledging your emotions, and you are trying to bypass or ignore, or someone is devaluing them, or being like, no, 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 like, we don't have time for this, or whatever you're feeling, that doesn't make sense, like, keep moving forward, that gets stuck in the body. So again, like I said, emotions are energy in motion. When we're not allowing them to move, it gets stuck in the body, which then creates the unhealthy parts of stress. And that literally, we hold it in tension. Many people in their shoulders, or their back, or their jaw, or their stomach, and then that can cause different things, like, just a lot of other things that
Yeah.
become problematic with that, and weaken our immune system. So now we're not actually as healthy, like, in a cellular level, and all of that then goes into a lot of other stuff, right? So not recognizing that there are human beings, and therefore emotions are always part of being a human, not recognizing and creating a space and normalizing it, is to me like a negligent thing that then is creating these toxic environments for people. Uh and being able to recognize in a really sincere way that a reorg and a change is hard and challenging, and here's how we're going to move through it together. And if you're not on a leadership team thinking about that languaging before you do things, like, I really hope you do.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about, and I'll share some of my ideas, and then I would love to hear yours too. When there is something that happens. So I was in an organization that was, they had the terrible habit of wanting to cut the the lowest 10% of people regularly to make sure only the best and the brightest were there, right? And this layoff, this one in particular, happened without much warning. So it really came out of left field for everyone. Everyone was shocked. And there are a couple of different things that we did. So remember, leaders are not all people managers. Anyone can be a leader. So y'all have this in your hands, no matter what your role is. If you are a people manager, I highly encourage you having and ask me anything and all hands or whatever. There are different ways, and I'll probably write a blog post about this now that I'm thinking about it, about how to run one of those really well, where you are honoring the humans. You're protecting, you're abiding by the law, because there's a lot of legal things that you would need to worry about. And you're protecting your own human dignity in the process, because you're going to be in the crosshairs during that AMA. Right. So but I'll write something about that. Maybe we'll have an episode on that, but stay tuned for that. Maybe in a couple of weeks, I'll release that for everyone. Follow me on LinkedIn if you want that. It'll be in the show notes. But if you're not a people leader, same example, same thing. I went out and bought like dozens of donuts, and I brought them in. And I was walking around with them. And I said, "Would you like to eat your feelings? Would you like to eat your feelings?" No, okay, donut's not the healthiest example, but what it did, it acknowledged the fact that this really stinks. I know this is not great. All I know how to do is to go and buy donuts right now. Would
Mhm.
you like to eat your feelings?
Mm. Well, you know what I love that you just did there, because this is a tool and a skill that people can learn, that I hope everyone can learn, not only just for themselves, but for everybody in their life, is acknowledging and validating. It's something that when you go through coach training, and if you ever work with a certified coach, they are trained how to, like, acknowledge and validate. And so I train all of my leaders on it. And I love that you say leaders does not mean that you need to be in a managerial position. Leadership, the way I define it, is having influence. And I hope that everyone feels like they're a leader of at least their own life, and that they're influencing their own life. So even if you're only using this tool and skill on yourself, lovely, wonderful. But acknowledging and validating what you just example you had there was like, I'm acknowledging that something happened and validating that that emotions are okay. And here's a way that I can help bring some comfort right now, which is maybe some donuts. And maybe someone's like, I don't need the donuts, but just the fact that you thought about acknowledging and validating that this is challenging makes me feel 1% a little better, right?
Yeah.
And what I'm always really clear about is acknowledging and validating does not mean you agree with the other person. You do not need to agree with how they're feeling or it make even any sense to you about
Yeah.
why they're feeling that way, to still be able to acknowledge and validate what they're feeling. And if people are like, well, I don't understand what that means, acknowledging and validating is acknowledging that whatever is happening is true to that person in this moment, right? So it is true for them. So you're acknowledging that something's happening and you're validating that it's true for them in this moment. And what that can really help to do is, instead of continuing to have like an armor or a wall, which many of us have in various ways, which makes sense because it's the way we've learned to protect ourselves, right? The acknowledging and validating helps to soften and release that armor, that wall, so that there can actually be connection, conversation, and be able to process what's going on. So I love that you brought that up as an example.
Well, and thank you for talking that through, because for anyone, don't just go out and buy the donuts. Because that's, if you just buy the donuts and put them on in the break room or wherever it might be, people are going to be like, oh my God, is she celebrating the fact that people are leaving? Like, is that what she's doing? Or as, you know, if we can afford donuts and whether it comes out of my pocket or the company's pocket, people don't care, right? If we can afford donuts, why did we let go of people, right? Like, it has to come with that. It was a vehicle for for seeing people and acknowledging this stinks. This stinks. I don't have any answers. This stinks. All I'm going to say is it stinks. And I see that. I see that. Yeah.
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 Thank you for doing that, because some people might think, okay, the action, and so it's a multiple thing. It's the action and the actual acknowledging and validating and witnessing and seeing. You just said
Yes.
seeing, right? As humans, we want to feel seen and witnessed and then acknowledged and validated. And that is the biggest gift that we can give each other and ourselves, right? So all of these tools can also be used for ourselves, instead of what I think happens to a lot of people, myself maybe more, I don't know, is that my inner critic, that inner gremlin, is always
Yeah.
like, well, no, you should feel like you shouldn't be stuck in this. You shouldn't keep thinking about this.
Yeah.
Like, you should be over this by now. I think that
Yeah.
happens a lot in grief, is like, I should be over this by now. It's like, well, whose timeline is that? Like, where was that
Right.
timeline? Right? It's okay to miss somebody. It's okay to miss colleagues. It's okay to miss the thing that you did. It's okay to I was doing a group session recently and we were talking about having to be adaptable to situations.
Mm.
Came up a lot was people working on projects that then all of a sudden they go a different direction, or they like throw the project out completely. And while you do need to be engaged enough and care enough
Mm.
to like be motivated to do the project, there's also this balance of not getting so attached to every project. And grief is part of that too. If you're working on something and this is your focus for like a month, month and a half, and then all of a sudden you find out, nope, we're scrapping all of this. Yeah, it makes complete sense to be like sad and frustrated and angry and all of that. And there are multiple stages of grief. I mean, we haven't even talked about those, and I can never remember
No.
all of them, but most of them are like, denial is one of them, right? And then there's the sadness, there's the despair, there's the frustration and the anger, to then the acceptance part of it. And we have to go through all those stages to actually get to acceptance. We can't just jump to it. That would be bypassing, right? We have to actually experience all of those. And anger is a big part of it. Sadness is a big part of it. All of that, and knowing that it is okay. I mean, we I think before we started, you mentioned
I
my
did. I love your mug.
anxiety, right? Anxiety is part of grief. And what those movies teach us is like all of those emotions are fully necessary. And when they're data, and again, allowing ourselves to feel it so it doesn't get stuck.
And we're coming close to time, but I do want to highlight something you said earlier when you were talking about a little bit earlier and bring it into that grief stages. So the stages are not linear. And so they're not linear. So a lot of people think, oh, I go do this and then no, they're not linear. You have to pass through them all completely. You might be bouncing back and forth and looping on them. So
Mhm.
so if it's not resolving itself to the acceptance part, there's some more work to be done. There's some more work to be done. It'll happen when it's supposed to happen. It'll happen when it's supposed to
Yeah.
happen.
I get the last image I'll give, and this is not
Please.
from something I created, but when doing some research on grief, there was this lovely image of like a grief ball, right? And when whatever
Mm.
first happens, the ball feels really big.
Okay.
And it's like I'm just stuck in my grief. And then once you start going through the stages and you start finding ways, the ball doesn't actually get smaller. The life and the stuff you're doing around it gets so much bigger that the ball feels smaller, right? But it doesn't actually ever fully go away, and that's okay too. It's not about getting, I think about friendships or romantic relationships that ended. And I mean, we could do a whole episode on like friendship breakups and how we don't talk enough. And there's a ton of grief around that. Um, and I'll speak again from an I perspective. The relationships that have fallen away in my life, I still hold a lot of love for many of those people. Even if I knew that we were not supposed to be together or as a friend, we really
Yeah.
grew apart. It is possible to still have that that kind of little like, oh, I really do miss them. And you know what? Like, I am building this bigger life around it. It doesn't fully go away. That is okay. It's going to feel really big right away, and just continuing to be with yourself. And if you're in a workplace and you are in a position, whether you're a people manager or not, whether if you are someone who is I mean, I wasn't a manager for a while in my workplace, and yet I was somebody who everyone came to the dance studio, both students and adults alike, because that was the space I was creating, was for people to come in and be a human and get acknowledged and validated, right? So we have influence no matter where we are in an organization. You have the influence to be able to be that person. Um, the very least, be it for yourself, and just know that the more that you acknowledge and validate, the more that you hold space for yourself and others, the life will get bigger around, and the grief will feel smaller because you're building around it.
That is such a beautiful image and such a beautiful place for us to pause our conversation. Stephanie, I am so grateful to you for your friendship. I'm so grateful to you for joining me twice. I feel like you might be visiting us again. And I trust that anyone who's listened to this episode has gotten something out of it. And I hope that y'all will join us next time for another topic for the Messy Middle Matters. Bye, everyone. If you've got some Get Stuff Doners on your team or are one who takes pride in your work, we just dropped a brand new I Get Stuff Done collection in the Messy Middle merch shop. You'll also find the classics Don't Make Me Regret Trying to Be Helpful and Words Matter. They make fantastic year-end gifts, and yes, we even have gift cards. And if something's running late, there's a free I ordered it, but it's not here yet download you can hand them in the meantime. Check everything out at messymiddlemerch.com. And if you like this episode, a like, share, or subscribe goes a really long way in helping us spread the word. Till next time.